Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Chrissy, and I am very happy to welcome you to the Doylestown Bookshop's virtual event series. I'm so excited to welcome award-winning author Jillian Cantor as she discusses her new novel, which was published, dropped today, Half-Life, with #1 New York Times bestselling author Christina Baker Kline. The authors will be taking your questions after their discussion. If you would like to submit a question, please click on Ask a Question at the bottom of your screen and enter your questions there. If you're watching from a phone or tablet, click the icon with a question mark to submit your questions. You can also enter them in the chat box. If you would like to purchase their books from the Doylestown Bookshop, click the button on your screen that says buy the books. We have curbside pickup available at both of our locations, or we can ship the books to you. I've had a few questions during past events from viewers who are accustomed to Zoom events, so to avoid any confusion, only our guests and myself will be able to participate through video and audio. You may interact with us through that chat box and through the Q&A on your screen. Now, a little bit about our authors. Jillian Cantor is the author of award-winning and best-selling novels for adults and teens, including In Another Time, The Hours Count, Margot, and The Lost Letter, which was a USA Today bestseller. She has a BA in English from Penn State University and an MFA from the University of Arizona. Christina Baker Kline is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of 8 novels, including The Exiles and Orphan Train. She is also published in 40 countries. Her novels have received the New England Prize for Fiction and the Maine Literary Award, among other prizes, and have been chosen by hundreds of communities and universities as one book, one read selections. Her essays, articles, and reviews have appeared in publications such as the New York Times and the New York Times Book Review, the Boston Globe, the San Francisco Chronicle, Lit Hub, Psychology Today, and Slate. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. We're so excited to have you tonight.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. We're looking forward to your conversation.
Jillian, what kind of dog do you have? I know. In the chat, she was like, someone's dog. That's my dog. Sorry. She's a rescue. I have 2 dogs, but the one barking, she's a rescue Chihuahua Terrier. She loves to be in my office, and I kicked her out. So now she's guarding on the other side of the door. So like probably someone else in my family is walking, and she's alerting me. So sorry. Problem. I mean, actually, we were just, first of all, I'm so delighted to be here. We were just joining me. Oh, it was fantastic. And I love launch day. And you just want to, you know what is amazing about this crazy, terrible year in terms of doing events online is that you can celebrate Pub Day, Publication Day, in a way that you actually didn't often get to do beforehand. Sometimes, you know, Publication Day would feel like a deal, but then it might come and go because you're not on tour yet or whatever. And now you have this wonderful opportunity to be in people's lives and homes on your actual Pub Day. Yes. Which is pretty fun. Do you think? And this is the second time you and I have gotten to do an event together, which we probably wouldn't get to do in non-pandemic times. I know. I'm in Southwest Harbor, Maine. And where are you right now? I'm in Tucson right now, Tucson, Arizona. So yeah, it would be hard to intersect. So that's so true. So I do have to say what I wanted to point out about the dog is that what is fun about this is that we're in our homes. We're intimately in our homes. Your children are behind the door. Your dog is over there. You know, someone's making dinner downstairs, and we're all kind of intimately connected. The other night, Alan Cumming did an event with the Shuggie Bain guy, and Alan Cumming loved and had posted on Twitter about the book Shuggie Bain, which is, by the way, so wonderful. It's not I want to say Douglas Copeland. It's Douglas Stewart or something, I think his name is. And but they were both just so clearly in their own homes doing their own thing. And I think that's one of the fun things about it. It is. It's fun to watch as a reader too. I like it as a reader. Yeah, it's great. And you can see behind people and whatever. And I see all the gorgeous books. This is a perfect display to be looking at. All right, so Jillian, congratulations. Thank you. Such a beautiful book. And I was just completely swept away by Half-Life. It felt cinematic. It felt like sliding doors. I don't know if any of you remember back in my early adulthood, or I think late teen, I can't remember exactly. But Sliding Doors was this movie with Gwyneth Paltrow where she stepped onto a subway in one scene, and then in the next scene she didn't step on the subway, and her life took two entirely different, right? Don't you remember? Her life took two entirely different directions.
I mean, I've been describing the book as Sliding Doors meets Marie Curie. So yeah, I definitely.
I didn't know that. I didn't even know that. But I was struck by how this book, you know, a lot of times we talk about books in different, how they fit in different categories. And for me, this book is such a what if story. Right? And that's a whole genre of like, what if this? So you've got this incredible true story or real life story about Marie Curie, which, by the way, sent me down every rabbit hole I could go down. I was reading about Marie Curie and looking at photographs. I even watched part of a movie called Radioactive. I don't know if you've seen it with Rosamund Pike, but about Marie Curie's real story, her struggles, her the breakthroughs, you know, her relationships. And then what you do in this book, which I'll let you describe in a second, but what you do that I love so much is that you imagine if her life had taken just one turn, one different turn, how would it end up? And what I love about the way you did it, so you show both in alternating chapters, which is really cool. What I love about how you did it is that there are unexpected results, that it doesn't play out the way you might think it would. So anyway, Jillian, I've sort of taken over, but what can you describe to the readers, to our audience?
Yes, of course. Yeah, no, thank you. You did a perfect job of describing it. And I have been saying when people ask that this book is Marie Curie beats Sliding Doors. And, you know, in Sliding Doors, there's a moment, I think, where she does get on a train and she doesn't get on a train. And actually my character ends up making that same choice. But for her, it's move to Paris or stay in Poland and marry this man. And, you know, I initially got an idea to write a novel about Marie Curie, and I knew I was going to call it Half-Life right away. But I thought that it was going to be just like a straight biographical novel about her, because she did have such a fascinating life, and not just the amazing things she accomplished, but I was really taken with her personal life and the fact that even though she had these amazing sort of career heights, she had these really deep personal lows at the same time. So I was really interested in that. But I started writing it. I think I wrote about 50 pages and I sent it to my agent, and she read it and she was like, this is fine. But she's like, it's not a Jillian Cantor novel. And I think I always do gravitate towards the what if. You know, you said this is a what if novel. And I was like, yeah, I think she's right. Maybe I'm not telling the story the right way.
I love that.
Yeah, so I started over again, but I thought I was going to write about Marie's daughter. She had two daughters. They both had fascinating lives. One of her daughters became a writer, so of course I was like gravitating toward her. I think I wrote about 75 pages. That was also called Half-Life, of a novel about her daughter. And my agent really liked that one. My editor really liked that one, but I just felt like I was missing something. And when I first started writing about Marie Curie, I had read this article that talked about the fact that she was engaged as a young woman in Poland, but the man's mother did not think she was good enough for him, which, like, imagine she's a future Marie Curie and she's not good enough for this woman's son. But it was because she was poor. But his mother made him break it off, and he did. And she ended up moving to Paris, and she went to the Sorbonne, and she met Pierre, and she discovered radium. And so I kept thinking, what if she had married this guy? You know, she wouldn't have done all these things. And then I also had read this one little tidbit that later in life, after she died, there was a statue of her erected in front of her institute in Poland, and he used to go sit there every day and eat his lunch and stare at the statue. And so I kept thinking, I have to find a way to put this in the book. This is so interesting. And finally it hit me, no, wait, this is the book. You know, what if she did? So I started over for the third time, and also called Half-Life. But then I liked Half-Life even better for the title, because there were two women sort of side by side. So my eventual novel that came out today. It's Marie's story, if she moved to Paris, and then Marya, which was her given name in Poland, her story, if she had stayed behind and she had married Kazimierz, and just sort of see, you know, not only how her life would have changed, but how the world would have changed, how science would have changed, and the people around her too in her orbit.
I have so many questions because there's so many parts. I mean, learning the science obviously had to do. Figuring out the world of Poland versus the world of Paris and what that was like. So well, Jeff Art, she's this great writer and wrote Sleepless in Seattle and has a new book coming out, a new novel coming out called Attachments, is here tonight. And he wrote a comments.
I saw that. Hi, Jeff.
See that? Had it been another day, I might have looked the other way. He says, this is my favorite lyric ever, and it seems to apply here. And I think that's exactly right. Jeff, what is that from? I don't even know what that's from. But it's so true. It's those minute moments, it's those tiny moments. And what I love about your characterization, and again, a million questions, but what I love about your characterization of Marie and Marya, these two paths that she could have taken, is that she's the same person. I mean, her personality, who she is, was formed, and it manifested differently depending on the path she took.
Right.
And one opens up a world of possibility, but is also filled with heartache in a certain way, which is her real life, Marie Curie. And then the other, she leads a much more conventional life, but in some ways, she still is her brilliant self. And so there are still all these awakenings.
Yeah. I mean, you know, writing was interesting because I really felt she was the same person in both storylines, but that her environment sort of affected what happened to her. But I felt like no matter what choice she made, no matter what access or opportunity she had this desire to learn and this great scientific mind. And she was going to continue to pursue that, no matter if she was in Poland where she really had no access, or if she, you know, went to Paris like she did. So it was a really interesting exercise sort of as a writer to write the same character, but different in both storylines.
Yeah, I love that. And in fact, at one point in the story, and it's such a climactic moment, it's toward the end, you have almost the identical paragraph in the two different sections of the story. And that was when I realized, oh my gosh, I had chills. Like, this is, you're pulling the story. The unexpected twists and turns have led to this moment where there's this sort of connection between the story.
Yeah, I think I actually did that a few times, and it was definitely very intentional. Yeah, where it was sort of the same scene but different because her life was different, and so you got to see how even that moment would have been changed.
It's really I love that. So. Thank you, Jeff. It's from I've Just Seen a Face. And I think Doylestown, who's also like on top of it, had said that as well.
Yeah.
Robin Ryan asks if you would mind reading, and you and I just talked about this, that
we did.
A passage or two that you would like to read.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So I'm just going to read really, really short passage, which we talked about because I don't want to be, reading for hours by myself on Crowdcast, but I'm going to just read, so, I sort of already explained the premise, but I'm going to just read sort of the first few paragraphs of Marya's first chapter and then the first few paragraphs of Marie's first chapter. So you could just sort of see how it starts to play out differently from the very beginning. So this is right, the book begins where you get to see that Marya's engaged to Kazimierz and he breaks up with her and she gets pretty depressed and can't decide what to do. And finally her father convinces her she needs to go to Paris and study like she always wanted to. So she goes to the train station. She's about to get on the train to go to Paris. And then Kazimierz comes and says, no, wait, don't go. I want to marry you. So this is the first Marya chapter. And this is in Poland in 1891. You have a choice. There is always a choice. Kazimierz and I chose each other. We were married a month after that day on the train platform. I became Marya Zorawska at a small church in Warsaw with only Papa and Hila in attendance. His parents disowned him, as they'd promised they would, refusing to speak to him or come to our wedding or give him any money. But I had never had any money, and anyway, what was money when we had love? We had each other, and that was everything. So that's just the first paragraph of Marya. And then you get to sort of go through the rest of the chapter with her and see how she starts her life in Poland. This is the next chapter, which is Marie. And this is Paris, France, 1891. You have a choice. There is always a choice. I get on the train to Paris, leaving Kazimierz still standing at the station, looking as though I had trampled upon his heart. But my own heart feels free, bursting with so much possibility for my future. The heavy sinking cloud that had crushed my thoughts and my hopes, working so many dull years as a governess, begins to lift as the train pulls away from Warsaw. My university education is finally within my grasp after all these years. Maybe my love for Kazimierz had not been love at all, as now the prospect of giving up university for him does not feel even remotely right to me the way it had only months earlier. 40 long and uncomfortable hours later, Brania is waiting for me at the station in Paris. She completed her course of study in obstetrics and is a married woman now, having fallen in love with another doctor. It is wonderful to see her again, and my heart swells further. And then she starts her life in Paris from there.
Oh my gosh, I know. I love that. And part of what I like about the way you handled this story is that, as I said earlier, there are no easy answers, and there are no kind of takeaways. In other words, some people choose to be in this. I mean, this is exactly what it is in a way, but like it's sort of the woman who devotes her life to her career, and the woman who marries early and becomes, a mother and takes a more traditional path. And I think all of us who are mothers have been in communities of both, right? And
yeah.
But what I love is that you avoid a lot of the cliches of it. So you show us what's beautiful about both options, and also how one option doesn't completely get rid of the other option. I love. So how did that develop? I know that's a sort of ephemeral question, but how did that develop that you were able to have that subtlety throughout?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely thought about that a lot as I was writing that, no matter which path you choose in your life, it's not going to be all good or all bad, and just thinking about what the balance is. And, what really brought me into the story of Marie to begin with, like I said, was her personal life. So she had these enormous tragedies in her personal life, and she had some pretty terrible things happen to her. She was actually, I'm not going to give any spoilers because I do feel like there are plot points in the book, but when she won her second Nobel Prize in 1911, she was going through this sort of crazy personal scandals to the point where the people in charge asked her not to come to Sweden because they didn't want the bad press. She, of course, said no and went anyway. But it was like, she's winning this second Nobel Prize, the only person at the time to have won a second Nobel Prize. But meanwhile, everything's falling apart in her life. And just sort of thinking about that balance. And she struggled a lot with fame. She achieved so much, but she had a very difficult relationship with the press. She struggled with her fame. She did not want to have to use her fame. She wanted to be in her lab. She wanted to be doing the work. That's what interested her. And so, maybe a famous life isn't better than an anonymous life. And even though Marya didn't have that opportunity, maybe she had smaller opportunities. And I just really thought about the fact that sometimes a great life doesn't mean a big life. And how, and they both had bad things and good things happen to them. And I think that's true for life in general.
Yeah, it's lovely. I did an event the other day with Avni Doshi, who wrote Burnt Sugar, which was a Booker Prize finalist. And it's a gorgeous book, by the way. I highly recommend it. There's this line in it. I always, when I prepare for events, I write down the quotes that I love and whatever. And this line was, staying doesn't have the appeal, the mystery of escape. To stay is to be stayed, to be resigned, to believe this is all there will ever be. She was talking about kind of the tension that you discuss in this book about staying, about, having a conventional life and escaping. And I love that you're playing always in the book with escaping versus staying in many different ways.
Yeah, and I mean it's sort of like the idea, is the grass really greener somewhere else too,
Yes.
right? It's like, I think a lot of times we think, well, if I had just done this instead of this, it would have been better. But would it have been better, or would it have just been different? And that's definitely what I'm exploring throughout the book.
I also love that I'm not going to give away a major plot point, but I will say that the stories overlap, because Marya ends up changing the history as we know it of Marie Curie. To me, that would have been, I was imagining writing this and I was thinking my brain would hurt. Yeah. So Jillian, actually we have already, a bunch of great questions, and I just want to piggyback onto them to say that that's such an interesting thing and so hard to decide what you change and what you don't in history. But so Jillian asks, Arlene asks, here are my questions. So what was the most inspiring and most challenging aspect of writing Half-Life? And I was wondering.
I think that was the most challenging. What you just pointed out was keeping track of, because both storylines have almost all the same characters, but the characters are different in each storyline because of this one choice. Like her sisters are in both, and Pierre Curie is in both, but they're not exactly the same. So it was like keeping track of which storyline I was in and which version of the character it was and how they all fit and intersected. And my brain did hurt often as I was writing, but also it felt like it was a really fun puzzle. And I was like really excited to work on it every day, but it was like this million piece puzzle that was laid out on my dining room table and seemed impossible at first. But then as I started to fit more in, everything started to make a lot of sense to me. So I think that was the most challenging part, was figuring out how to fit together that. And also I knew that Marya still was going to come to science in some way, but in the first draft, she ends up coming to it differently than she does in the final draft. And so that was a challenge for me. And that was something that I worked on with my editor when we were revising the book. So just sort of making sure I had the exact right path for this fictional woman.
Why did it change? And what did it change from?
I don't want to give anything away from the book, but it just, in the finished version, she came to it more on her own, through her own work and her own passion. In the original version, she was more closely connected with some of the people from her real life, and it wasn't as much her being in control of it. So, I'm trying not to give away the plot, but it's
it gives, having now read all the stuff about Marie Curie, it is, and I now have written a bunch of books about people who lived in real life, and you can find the information online.
Yes. Yeah. No, but the fictional woman. So she does end up making a contribution to science, but it's a different contribution than what I had in the first draft of the novel, basically. Yeah. And she comes to it a slightly different way. So it doesn't sound like a huge change, but for me, it was hard for me to get that right at first. So I did struggle with that. And then the other part of the question was, she said, what was the most inspiring part? Was that it?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I think the most inspiring part, learning about Marie Curie, obviously, she was a woman who was so brilliant and had so much passion for her work in a time where there really were no women in science. When she went to the Sorbonne, she was the only woman in her classes. And she used to hate that the men would talk about the fact that she had pretty hair. And she was like, don't talk about my hair. I'm here to learn. And so I just kind of being inspired by the fact that she was able to break down all these barriers and achieve these amazing things that she did. And even when she did have a lot of tragedy in her life, she overcame it, and she just kept working and kept doing these amazing things. And just learning more about her was really inspirational.
Yeah. I was struck by how incredibly fortuitous it was that in real life she met Pierre, because basically they were partners in the science. He understood what she was doing, and she was a crazy genius, and he was pretty close too. They were really well matched.
They were, and he was very supportive of her of her career. She was the one who discovered radium, and he just helped her, and interestingly enough, when they were first up for the first Nobel Prize, the committee didn't even want to include her. They just wanted to give it to him. And he had to argue that it really wasn't even his work. It was her work, and he was helping. And so I think they finally agreed that they could share it. But he was very supportive.
In some ways.
Yeah.
He was, and he took her seriously from the beginning. I mean, obviously recognizing her brilliance, but imagine how many people she might have married who didn't really understand.
Yeah, I don't think she would have married them. She didn't even want to marry Pierre. She turned him down 3 times. And it was only after he told her because she wanted to move back to Poland after she was finished with her education. It was only after he said he would give up science and he would just move to Poland with her and teach French and she could work, that she agreed to marry him. But they did not end up moving back to Poland because the university Marie applied to refused to hire her because she was a woman. So they stayed in France after all.
All to the better. So Jillian, are you a scientist? Like, did you know all this stuff before? How did this happen for you?
No, I'm definitely not a scientist. And I've already admitted this a few times in interviews, but I think chemistry was my worst subject in high school. So it's sort of the last subject I would expect to come to. But I felt very much from the beginning that it wasn't going to be a book about science. I mean, obviously there's some science in it because it's about Marie Curie, but I wanted it to be, a book about her life and her as a woman and what she overcame. And I think the thing that made me feel like I could pull it off was reading the biography that her daughter Eve wrote about her. And she had 2 daughters, Eve and Irene. Irene did become a scientist, and she actually won her own Nobel Prize, of course. And then Eve, her younger daughter, became a concert pianist, much to Marie's chagrin. And then she became a writer. And after her mother died, Marie went and wrote a biography about her. So I think reading Marie's description of her mother, reading Eve's description of her mother and her mother's work gave me a way into it, because here's this woman who's also a writer, who's not a chemist or a physicist, but she was able to describe it and process it in a way that I could understand too.
Yeah.
So I hope that I put enough in so people get a sense of it, but also I don't think it's a very science heavy book. I don't think it's weighed down with too much science.
Right. It's completely understandable, but the reader is aware of the work you put in to make it, breathe and to sort of make it feel authentic. And also the work about Poland and about Paris. Did you travel? Did you go to those places?
I didn't go to those places, no, but I did do a lot of research about them. Definitely.
Yeah. That's great. So Ryan asked a question that I was thinking about too, which is, she says, I'd love to hear about the writing journey. Did the book always have the structure? Did you do big revisions? What I wondered is, did you write Marie Curie all at once, and then write my story? How did that kind of process work?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I wrote it in the order that you see. So I did go back and forth, but before I started, I did have a pretty big timeline. I mean, it wasn't really an outline so much as a timeline where I had sort of what every chapter was going to be and where each woman was in the different years. So, before I wrote, I had that in front of me, and then I was sort of able to see, okay, this is the year I'm in, this is what she's doing. And then I could write the chapter and go to the next chapter. And then when I revised, I did revise one story at a time. But even when I do multiple points of views for all of my books, I like to write the first draft in order, because I feel that gives me a better sense of the pacing that I can't get from writing them individually. But I do separate them out to revise them just to make sure, they flow and everything makes sense. And that's pretty much I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, you had to very carefully weave some things in from one chapter, in one perspective to another.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did sort of have that planned out, and some of it I didn't know, but I figured it out as I was going along. But there were a few key moments in Marie's life that I knew I wanted Marya to sort of hit those same moments. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say that most of them are with Pierre. Obviously Pierre was going to come into her life one way or another, because I do believe some people will just find their way into our lives no matter what. So there were some sort of key scenes with him that I knew were going to end up in both storylines, and I did plan out where they were going to go beforehand.
I did think that was a particularly interesting sort of philosophical point that you made in the novel, which is that when there are powerful people in your life, even if you do turn one way instead of another, they very well could end up in your life.
Yeah.
Like that was one of those unexpected kind of moments, surprises that I loved about the book.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And I mean, I think I do believe that personally, that there are just some people that we're just meant to connect with, and they're going to get into our lives one way or another.
Yeah. Serendipity, as Christine said.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. So there are a couple more from Arlene that are really interesting. So she asks, what did you learn about yourself when you were writing the book?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I guess, first of all, I learned that I am not going to write an entire book if it's not feeling right to me, since I started over 3 times. And I have definitely stopped books before at 50 pages and just thought, like, this is not the right book. But I think this is the first time I did it with the same subject matter. And Marie, I would not give up on Marie Curie because I knew there was a story to tell about her. I just couldn't come to what it was. And then, yeah, I mean, I think, what did I learn about myself? Like, maybe I wasn't as bad at chemistry as I thought. Maybe I didn't like my chemistry class. I mean, I don't know. I found myself understanding the science more as I read about it as an adult than I did when I was in 11th grade. So I don't know what that says about me.
No, that's important. Like that you found a way in to the science through literature. I mean, it felt, through learning about this woman and her place in the world. And sometimes I think for a lot of us who read and write novels, read a lot, that is a portal that feels different than like taking a chemistry class.
Yeah. And I think also I really kind of surprised myself in how much I related to Marie, because going in, I would have thought that we didn't really have anything in common. She's an amazing scientist. I really didn't know anything about science, but her passion for her work and just her drive and her desire to learn and to do what she wanted to do, I could relate to that so much as a writer who just, you know what it's like to be a writer. We get rejected all the time, and it's like, you have to have that own passion within yourself to tell the story or to keep going. So I really related to her on that level. And I think that surprised me a lot. I didn't expect that to happen going in.
My sister was talking about a Lady Gaga interview, I guess, today, where she said, I was a talented singer, but so were thousands of other people in New York City who were 21 years old at the same time. She said, and I just was tenacious. I always had my keyboard on my back. And I thought that was such an interesting way to say it, having your keyboard.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's what it's like being a writer too. You just have to like keep going and keep pushing, and you have to really want to tell a story and get it out there to get it out there. Yeah. And Marie was very similar, but just with her own thing, and that was science.
Right. That's absolutely true. Love that. So Elle asks that, she says, you started over writing this book 3 times. Mm-hmm. Is this your normal process? And how long did it take to write this book?
No, that's not my normal process. And that's why I said I was surprised I didn't give up. I mean, I definitely have started things and given up after 50 pages, not feeling it was right. But normally if I have sort of like a subject and an idea for a book, it's like I'll have it pretty set in my head and I'll write it. And, I've actually already finished my next book and I knew what I wanted to write and I sort of outlined it and like I wrote it. And it wasn't something I had to start over 3 times. It was just, for me, finding the right way into the story was a little bit harder than I thought. So those first 2 drafts, I think, it was like 6 to 8 months I was working on them. And I remember it was the first week in January when I started over again with the half-life that you see now, because I had taken 2 weeks off over Christmas and sort of let it sit. And I think when I came back to my desk, that's when I was like, this isn't right. And I emailed my agent, and she probably thought that I was crazy. But I said, I'm starting over again. And so then I think it took me about like 6 months to write the first draft after that. But I had already done all the research. I had already tried to write the book 2 times. So it took about 6 months to do the first draft after that point. And then I edited it for another few months with my editor after that.
Wow, that sounds really fast in the end. I mean, for writing a full book.
Yeah, I mean, I usually do draft pretty quickly once I have the idea. It'll take me months and months to settle on the idea, but then I can write the draft in 3 to 6 months once I have it all fully formed. So it was just the false starts that sort of added a little time this time, I think.
Sure. I mean, can you talk a little bit about your book that you've finished and what's the story with it?
Sure. So that will be out January 2022. And it's called Beautiful Little Fools. And I actually had sold it on proposal about like a week before we all went into lockdown. So that is how I've spent most of the pandemic, writing this book, which was actually amazing because it took my mind off some other things that were going on in the world. But Beautiful Little Fools is a reimagining of The Great Gatsby, but it's told from the women's points of view. So it's Jordan and Daisy and Myrtle and Myrtle's sister, Catherine. And you get to see them in the years leading up to the summer that Gatsby takes place and the time after. And it's sort of like Big Little Lies meets Great Gatsby, because the women are also sort of implicated in Gatsby's death, and you see how they're all connected to him. So it was really fun to write. Yeah. And I had the idea, and I didn't have to start over 3 times. So that was also really helpful.
But you must have researched Gatsby. You must have had a pretty strong knowledge of that.
Yeah. I mean, I've always loved Gatsby. It's one of those books that I just come back to again and again. I loved it when I read it in high school and college and grad school. And it was just a book that I would just like read, every year or two. And so, thinking about like what Daisy and Jordan's perspective was really, really interesting. And I always have thought of that. I always wondered what is going on with these women. So it was really fun to get to explore what was going on with them.
I would think it must have been great with Daisy because she's such a cipher in some ways. Like it's hard to see who she really is.
Yeah. Jordan, I think ended up being my favorite character to write, I have to say. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was really, that was really fun. I mean, it's different from Half-Life for sure, but in a lot of ways it's similar because it's very much about women's roles and women's place in society and, what limitations women have and what limitations they don't have. So all of those same themes carried over for sure.
Yeah. Talk about that for a little bit. I want to know more about your own sense of writing in this fiction set in the past about women primarily. Are you noticing or have people pointed out to you themes in your own work and sort of obsessions and interests that play out, as in your various books?
Yeah, I mean, I am always drawn to women's stories and, always drawn to strong women's stories, I would have to say. And someone was actually asking me in another event, and saying Half-Life felt like such a departure for me because my last 3 novels were World War II novels, but it didn't feel like a departure at all because my characters are always these strong women, struggling with something, resisting. And Marie Curie fit very much into that. And I think, I wasn't really that interested in history when I was in high school, I have to say. It was probably down there with chemistry in my line of subjects. But I was never taught the history in high school that I like to explore. I feel like the textbook history is like the men's version of history. And I want to think about what the women were doing in history and, what women like me who were mothers and wives and trying to work and what were they doing. So I'm always drawn to that in my novels and thinking about how we can sort of understand them in the past and, make sense of them in our own worlds, I think.
Yeah.
So I know I always come back to those kinds of stories as a writer and as a reader.
Yeah, and as a reader. Well, speaking of which, what are you reading these days that you're enjoying, or that you have time to read right now?
Yeah, so I've actually been reading everyone's books that I'm doing in conversations with this week. I want to give a shout out to The Exiles, which I loved, which I read, I think in September or October when we did our In Conversation for your book, but it's coming out in paperback in July. Is that right?
Yes.
So, and it has a beautiful cover. But I love The Exiles, which is also a story about like strong women in history, right up my alley. And super interesting. But I just also finished Nora by Nuala O'Connor. I'm doing an In Conversation with her later this week. And that was a beautifully written book about James Joyce's partner, eventual wife, Nora Barnacle. And I'm reading The Mystery of Mrs. Christie right now by Marie Benedict. I'm doing an In Conversation with her next week. That's about Agatha Christie, and it's just fascinating.
These all were certainly the second two, especially really fit with your discovery of historical figures. My people tend to be anonymous, poor women. I didn't intend to keep doing that, but that's sort of what happened. My next book is a little different, but yeah, I can see how those really work beautifully together. So a couple more questions here. I have a million of my own still, but we'll take some from the audience. Okay, so how have you transitioned after writing this book as you move on to your new writing project? So did you have to, wave incense around, and how did you move from one project to the next in your own head and heart and everything else?
I think it just takes me a little bit of time. It's like I'm busy writing, busy editing, and then it just stops. And then like a week will go by and I'll be like, oh my God, I haven't done anything all week. It's like I have to give myself a time and space to move on to something else because I'm very connected when I'm in it. So Half-Life, actually, I think I finished around September 2019. So it took me like a good 6 months before I started writing that next project. I have to let it sit in my head and I have to make sure it's the right thing. And I get impatient with myself every time. And I just feel like I'm not being productive, even though I know I have to give myself that time.
Jillian, first of all, you're the hardest working person I know. Second, you have your next book already coming out less than a year after this one. So for all of you who are taking seriously what Jillian's saying right now, I'm suggesting that you I will never be a book year person, and I'm so in awe of people who do that.
I mean, Half-Life actually, the publication ended up getting pushed a little bit. So publishing is kind of long, I think. Like you finish a book and then it's a good year until it comes out. I mean, Half-Life was more like 20 months after I finished it until it came out. So it was a pretty long period of time. And I mean, I love to write. That's why I write. And if I'm not writing, I feel like there's something missing. So even when I have to just give myself time to process the next idea, I get very impatient with myself.
Okay, you're my new hero. Mary is here, who wrote The Lace Reader, which I'm in awe of you. And I'm so delighted to be part of a conversation that you comment on. Even though I'm taking full credit here, Jillian. It's
of course.
So she asks, how did you decide, and I don't know you, but I'm delighted that you're here, and this is a great book. You're going to love it. How did you decide on the ending of the fictional part of the story?
Well, I'll say that the end in both storylines, it ends when the woman dies. So, which is not a spoiler. So you get to see what happens up until the very end of their lives, basically, from this moment when she's in her early 20s to the end of their lives. But sort of the exact last scene, which I'm not going to tell you because, that would definitely be a spoiler. But I actually did struggle with that a little bit in the fictional story. And I always I have a writing friend that I always am brainstorming with, and she always helps me with the ending every time I call her when I get stuck. And so I think what she said to me in this one is you have to figure out a way for the endings to mirror each other the way the whole book mirrors each other. And so when she said that, it did click for me. And if you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about, but I don't want to tell you. But I did know when I started, Marie died in 1934. I was like, okay, we're going to go up to her death. Actually, the first chapter, she's on her deathbed and it flashes back. And then I knew we were going to go up to Marya's death too. So you could also kind of see how her death ends up being different based on her choices.
Yeah, I love that. It's very, it feels very authentic. Okay, so Christine asks, did you have any input on your book cover? I love your novels. The Lost Letter is so memorable, but here's the book cover. Which,
yeah.
Halfway.
I did actually. They sent me a cover at first that I really didn't like. It looked nothing like this. I have to say, I think it was a different designer. But I got the cover, and I think I said, I really don't like this cover. and I probably sent like a 5-page email explaining why at the time. And I had loved the cover from my last book, In Another Time, which is actually behind me here. And I think I said, this cover was amazing. Could we go back to the same designer? And they did. And like within 24 hours, she sent me these 3 amazing covers. And they said, which one do you like? And I was like, I love them all. So I think this one was sort of the one that we all agreed on was perfect for the book. I love the way her life's reflecting, but not exactly. And it felt so right. And so after I saw that, I don't even think anything changed. I think everyone sort of agreed this was the best of the 3, and then we went with it. But I was really happy that when I didn't like the first one, everybody listened to me, and they came back with something else. And I think the cover that it has now is perfect for the book. So I'm really happy with it, which I can take no credit for. It's not like I designed it. I mean, the designer is amazing, but I think it's perfect.
But I think having input and your strong sense of what you didn't like is part of the process.
Yeah.
And it's,
yeah.
It's hard.
And like writers don't always have input. I mean, in the past, before I've said, I don't like this cover. And then I've heard, well, everyone else likes it too bad. So it was really nice that I did have input, but that doesn't always happen. So I really appreciated that though.
And you chose the title as well, which sometimes people have.
Yeah. And definitely I've had to change titles in the past, but I felt very strongly this was the right title. And luckily everybody agreed with me. So I chose the title as well.
So Jillian, you've written a lot of books, a lot of novels. Does it get easier for you as you in your career, what is easier and what isn't?
I think I know what to expect now. So it's, like when I wrote my first book, I was like, oh, maybe it'll just be a #1 New York Times bestseller and I don't have to do anything. But I think I have more reasonable expectations of what happens throughout the publication process and, what to expect and what I can do that's helpful. And so a lot of that is easier. I don't know that the writing is ever easier. I feel like the writing is always a challenge for me, but that's also why I love to do it. If it wasn't a challenge, I would definitely get bored.
Do you get better in your books? Do you feel like your writing is better or more complex, or that you're setting yourself new challenges? What is it that
I hope so. I like to think that I definitely do feel like I'm setting myself new challenges, and I like to sort of challenge myself every time. I mean, Half-Life with the 2 mirror timelines was, like you said in the beginning, made your brain hurt thinking about it. There was definitely a big undertaking that I hadn't done before. So I do always try, like to do something a little different that will be a little harder. And I do think I have more confidence. I don't think 10 years ago I would have thought that I could have pulled this novel off. So just having the experience, having the experience of writing so many novels under my belt. Yeah. When I come up with an idea, my first thought isn't, I can never pull this off. Then I think, okay, I'll figure out a way to do this. I figured it out before. Yeah. So that's been a change for sure.
I think that's huge. To me, that's the big thing. And, I tell this to my 20-year-old kids, that, it's not that it gets easier in having a creative life.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily get easier. What does get easier is that you can do it. Even if it feels like it's killing you,
Yeah.
that
you can do it.
Through, you can write 3 versions of your book as you did, and even if it's long, and that also in my view, I don't know if you felt this way with this book, Jillian, but in my view, you can't always predict what's going to be hard and what's going to be easy. Sometimes you go into something thinking, this is going to be a breeze. I'm going to be able to do this, a short, quick novel. And then it's like,
it's always the one you think that's going to be easy that turns out to be just the most, the hardest thing to do. So but I feel like I just have more confidence to know that I will get through the process and I will make it work. And I do still always have that moment when I get the editorial letter from my editor and it's like she's telling me everything I need to change, and I suddenly feel overwhelmed and I think, oh my God, I don't know how to do any of this. I can't do this. And I have to process it. And then I'll wake up the next morning.
That moment when you get that letter, it's just sort of like, it's going to be so much work, but also going to kind of turn you upside down, and you have to just kind of like absorb. I find that it always is true.
Yeah, it is always. That part never gets any easier, but at least I know I've been through it before. So it's like, all right, well, I have figured this out before. I'll figure it out this time too. Right?
And the first reading is often like, she's totally wrong, or he doesn't know what he's talking about. And then,
I have to sleep on it. I have to sleep on it for sure. I know that now.
Well, that actually leads to, and we're almost at the end here, but B. Brown asks, did you stay with the same agent and editor throughout your career, or have you changed?
Yeah, I have been with the same agent throughout my whole career. So it's been about 15 years, and I've been with her the whole time. I've switched editors and publishers, throughout books. Half-Life, I do have the same editor and publisher that I had for In Another Time, and then also the same for Beautiful Little Fools. So I've been now with the same editor for the last 4 or 5 years or so.
So you must feel that you've found a sort of home for your books right now.
Yeah, definitely, which is really nice.
There are only 2 publishers left, so
yeah, I know they've all been combining, so
a little complicated that way. Oh my gosh! Well, we're at 7:59, and they told us we had to end at exactly 8. So I suppose we need to stop. We've had such fun.
It was really fun. Thank you so much for doing this, Christina.
Of course, it was a delight, and I really recommend the book. Everyone get Half-Life. It's wonderful. It's fun to be here, and congratulations on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you both so much for joining us. That was amazing. If anyone watching is interested in purchasing Half-Life or The Exiles, click the button on your screen that says buy the books. This was just a delight. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was
Thank you for having me.
Oh, anytime. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for activity in the chat, and we will see you next time. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.